Every morning at 4:30 a.m., before the city stirred and the sun reached over the skyline, Ernest Powell pushed open the back door of Delridge Tech Solutions with a battered mop bucket and a quiet sigh. He was 62, wiry but strong, with calloused hands, slow knees, and eyes that had seen more than they let on. For 23 years, Ernest had scrubbed the same linoleum floors, emptied the same overflowing trash bins, and listened to the same indifferent voices pass him by like wind through cracked windows. They never said thank you. Most never even said hello. He was just the janitor. But behind that faded blue jumpsuit and name tag stitched in crooked thread was a man who remembered every slight, every dismissal, every time someone looked right through him like he didn't matter. And Ernest, he was done being invisible. Delridge Tech was just starting out. The founder, Michael Langston, was a charismatic young man with a vision and a temper. Ernest had been hired through a temp agency to clean the small rented office while it was still half furnished. Back then, Michael had laughed with Ernest, asked him where he was from, even offered him pizza once. But the moment the company started growing and money started flowing, everything changed. Michael's voice got colder, his glances more judgmental. When Ernest once suggested they install hand dryers instead of wasting paper towels, Michael looked at him like he'd asked to sit on the board. "You're here to mop the floors, not manage operations," he snapped. "Stick to your lane." Ernest never spoke up again. Delridge Tech Solutions now occupied 10 gleaming floors of a downtown high-rise. The once humble startup was a $350 million software development firm serving major government contracts and Fortune 500 companies. The offices had become all glass, steel, and ego. Ernest, still in his faded jumpsuit, moved through the building like a ghost. The executives didn't know his name. The younger employees filmed TikToks while he vacuumed. Some mocked him under their breath. One day, a VP named Claudia asked him to clean a coffee spill from her shoe. "Can you get this? And try not to breathe so loud." He did it, silently. But that night, he opened his old notebook, the one he'd been writing in since the 90s, and scribbled one more name. Claudia Martin. Arrogant. Cruel. Doesn't know who I am. He closed the book, lit a cigarette out back, and smiled. Because they didn't know. They didn't know Ernest had been investing his money, slowly, carefully, for over 2 decades. They didn't know he lived in a fully paid-off house in a quiet suburb. They didn't know he'd taken night classes in business administration and finance back in the early 2000s. They didn't know he owned stock, real stock in their company. They didn't know, but they would. It started with a rumor. Whispers floated through the hallways. Delridge was struggling. Profits had dropped. Government contracts were stalling. There was talk of a merger, or worse, a buyout. Then came the layoffs. Half the junior staff were gone within a month. Claudia blamed market conditions. Michael Langston hadn't been seen in weeks. Ernest listened, observed, took notes. One night, he stayed late on purpose. He slipped into the executive conference room after hours and stood in the center, just looking around. On the glass wall was a whiteboard filled with projections, losses, and one big word in red, acquisition. Ernest pulled out his phone. He took photos. Then he made a call. See, Ernest wasn't just a janitor, not anymore. Over the years, he'd quietly become the majority shareholder in a small but aggressive investment group, one that had already taken control of 3 struggling tech firms in the last 5 years. Nobody at Delridge ever bothered to ask where those shareholder votes were coming from. They were coming from Ernest. He'd spent years slowly buying up Delridge stock, a share here, a bundle there, quietly, deliberately, through trusts and holding companies. When the price dipped, he bought more. And now, when the company was desperate, divided, and cornered, he saw his moment. He didn't ask for a seat at the table. He took the table. On a rainy Tuesday morning, Michael Langston, disheveled and defensive, called an emergency all-hands meeting. The auditorium buzzed with fear. Staff whispered about cuts, bankruptcy, collapse. Michael walked to the podium and began his speech. "These are difficult times for us all," he began, "but we have secured a buyer." The doors at the back opened. Heads turned. Ernest Powell walked down the aisle, dressed not in his jumpsuit, but in a tailored charcoal gray suit with polished shoes and a steel gray tie. He carried a leather folder and wore an expression like stone. Gasps. Confusion. Michael blinked. "Excuse me, this is a private—" "No," Ernest interrupted, voice calm but commanding. "This is public. As of 8 a.m. today, my group has completed acquisition of Delridge Tech Solutions." Silence. Ernest stepped onto the stage. "My name is Ernest Powell. Some of you may know me as the janitor. Most of you don't know me at all. But I've been here since the beginning, watching, working, waiting. I believed in this company more than your founder did, and I put my money where my mop was." The crowd was stunned. Michael was pale. Ernest turned to him. "You're relieved of duty, effective immediately." Over the following weeks, Ernest didn't gloat. He didn't fire anyone without cause, but he made changes. Claudia Martin was demoted after an internal review revealed years of abusive conduct. Ernest assigned her to a new role, facility relations coordinator. She now answered to the head of custodial staff. She didn't last long. Michael Langston tried to sue, but Ernest's legal team, stacked with veterans of corporate warfare, buried him in paperwork. The lawsuit was dismissed. Michael disappeared from public view. Meanwhile, Ernest got to work. He installed mentorship programs for support staff, raised the wages of janitors, clerical workers, and cafeteria teams by 40%. He renamed the break rooms after employees who had served over 20 years, and every Friday, he walked the halls, not with a mop, but with a clipboard and a sharp eye. People began to greet him with respect, some with shame, many with awe. 1 year later, Delridge was thriving. The company had pivoted to AI infrastructure. Profits soared. Ernest's leadership, quiet, measured, unshakable, turned the company around. A once toxic culture became collaborative and inclusive. He still parked in the same spot he had for 23 years, still brought lunch from home in a brown paper bag. But now, his office had a corner view. One afternoon, a young intern nervously approached him. "Mr. Powell, can I ask you something?" Ernest looked up and smiled. "Of course." The intern hesitated. How did a janitor end up running a company like this?" Ernest chuckled softly. "By listening when no one thought I could hear, by watching when no one thought I could see, and by believing in myself when no one else did." He stood, handed the intern a folder. "Let that be your first lesson.